Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We will be getting started in just 1 minute. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for this public meeting on the Green Standard Community Improvement Plan. My name is Julia Lee Stitt, and I am a communications officer with the City of Kingston, and I am going to be moderating this online session. Before I hand it over to my colleagues, there's a few housekeeping items that we need to get through, and then we'll get to the main show. So this evening's session is live streamed and it is recorded, and you will have noted that it is also live closed caption. Your video and microphones and the chat feature are turned off for your privacy. 18 people have registered for this evening's session. So technology troubles sometimes happen. We recognize this. So we do have a list of common challenges and solutions available on our Get Involved Kingston site. And you can access them at www.cityofkingston.ca. Sorry. Actually, you can access them at www.getinvolved.cityofkingston.ca. And there you can find solutions if your audio or your video are not working. You can also adjust your view options so they can see both the presentation and the members of the project team, which can be a nice added feature. However, if you don't have that comfort level with Zoom, I might suggest that you just leave things as they are. One of the easiest solutions if you're experiencing some problems with Zoom would be to simply close the Zoom program and then relaunch it. You also have the option to call into the meeting, and I have the phone number listed there as well as the webinar ID. So it might be a good idea just to jot those down just in case. It will also have been in the confirmation email that you will have received prior to this evening's session. You also have the option to follow on YouTube, and if you are already doing so, we welcome you. We're going to be doing our best. If you encounter any technology problems, we're going to be doing our best to help you through them. You can communicate any of those issues with us through the chat feature. However, again, sometimes the easiest and simplest option is to just close Zoom and then relaunch it. So in terms of asking questions, we do have quite a bit of information to get through this evening, but we also want to provide everyone in attendance with an opportunity to bring your questions forward. This evening, we're going to be leveraging the Q&A tool, which should be visible to you in the bottom bar of your screen. And what you can do is through this evening's session, if a question comes to mind, you can enter it into the Q&A feature. One thing that I would ask is that you make those questions detailed and yet concise, because we will be reading them aloud and the project team will be responding to them. And so if you can just bear that in mind when you're drafting that question, that will be much appreciated. But again, we are going to be saving those until the end, and it's just going to help with flow. If you are joining us by phone this evening, then I would ask if you have a question to press *6, and that is going to trigger the raise hand function, at which point we will enable your audio so that you can ask your question. Again, if this is the option that you choose to go with, just being respectful of everybody's time, we would ask that you keep that question concise, just so we can get to as many questions and provide as many answers as possible in the time we have this evening. All the questions and answers will be shared in the project reporting back document. So if you do ask a question that due to time constraints we're unable to get to this evening, then it will be responded to in that reporting out document, which gets posted on our project page on Get Involved Kingston. So if you are not already signed up to receive updates on that project page, I do invite you to go to the site and follow the project so that anytime a new document is posted there, you do receive a notification. Just a reminder as well that we are currently accepting feedback on the Green Standard Community Improvement Plan. So if you do have input to provide, please send it along before 4 p.m. tomorrow. On the screen before you now, you have our guidelines for participation, which were actually developed by the community. And they are going to be the guidelines that we're going to be following this evening. So if there is an item, anything additional you would like to have added to the guidelines for this engagement session, I would ask that you use the raise hand function. Excellent. Okay, so seeing no objections to the guidelines for participation, we will proceed into this online engagement session. And at this point in the session, I'm going to be turning it over to Dave Roewade and Julie Salter-Keane. And the next voice you will hear from is Dave's.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Great. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Julie Lee. My name is Dave Roewade, Project Manager with Climate Leadership at City of Kingston. And the next slide will show what the meeting objectives, if you would mind, Julie Lee. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the meeting objectives tonight is to provide an overview of the Community Improvement Plan program, or CIP, help us develop a better understanding of the topics that matter most to you during the question and answer session, and outline the next steps after tonight. Next slide, please. Over the next 10 or 12 minutes, I'll be presenting City Council's strategic priorities as it relates to this plan, why we need better buildings in the first place, what is a community improvement plan, What are the next steps? And then we'll have the question period as Julie Lee has outlined. Next slide, please. Every term of council, the city establishes a strategic plan for that 4-year period. You'll see 5 strategic focus areas on the slide. One of them is to demonstrate leadership of climate action. Let's take a look at some of the actions under that strategic focus area. Next slide, please. Staff measure GHG emissions in both the community and in our corporate operations towards the reduction targets that were established by City Council. I'll show those on the slide shortly. We've been doing work both in the community and within our city fleet on electric vehicles. We develop low carbon use city facilities, as well as in an incentive program for new residential and commercial construction to reach a net zero level in the community. We're about to launch a community energy retrofit program for existing homes next year, and we recently established a charitable climate action fund for local projects. Next slide, please. Before we go any further, I thought we should just quickly go over a couple terms you'll hear throughout this presentation. So a net zero energy building is one where it captures or harnesses as much energy on site as it consumes on a yearly basis. Carbon neutral is where there may be some emissions still generated by a building, but they are offset by financial support in a project that elsewhere could be anywhere in Canada or in the world. So it makes the overall net emissions zero. Net zero carbon, on the other hand, means there are no carbon emissions coming from that building. So the electricity may be purchased from a 100% renewable energy supplier. Then finally, 100% renewable energy is referring to that is naturally available on an infinite basis and is emission-free in its consumption, for example, the sun and the wind. There are others, those are just examples. Next slide, please. Council has established the following GHG reduction targets. In the short term, 15% below 2018 emission levels by 2022. In the midterm, 30% below 2011 levels by 2030, and carbon neutrality by 2040. While this is for corporate operations, this is also at an aspirational level for the community, while we work with stakeholders and community partners to achieve these. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to cover why we need better buildings over the next few minutes by addressing what the GHG emissions are from buildings in this community and explain why we need to build for tomorrow, largely addressing the issues of rising energy costs, changing climate conditions, and the fact that we have the knowledge to do so. Next slide, please. Let's start first with the GHG impact from buildings in Kingston. Next slide, please. So based on our 2018 community emissions inventory, we found that 43% of all local emissions come from buildings. Further broken down, that's 29% coming from industrial, commercial, and institutional buildings, and 14% from low-rise residential buildings. In terms of how much money was spent on energy in those buildings, collectively across the community was over $300 million, just on the energy used in those buildings. Next slide, please. So why should we build for tomorrow? Well, roughly half of today's existing building stock will still be in use in 2050. That means roughly the other half will be building from this point on. And so we should ask ourselves, what legacy will we leave behind for that other 50% for those that will be using it over the next 50, 80 to 100 years? Next slide, please. In terms of energy prices, we can see by looking at the consumer price index that the cost of energy, or the prices of energy, have risen faster than inflation, particularly in the last 20 years. I should mention that the orange line representing energy is for all types of energy. That would include electricity, natural gas, as well as gasoline, diesel, and propane. Next slide, please. Buildings will also need to perform differently in the future. Changing climate conditions have affected what's called heating degree days, which you'll see on your heating bill, or cooling degree days, which you may see on your electricity bill. So over the next 50 years, and even already started, we've seen a decrease in the number of days we need to turn our heat on, and an increase in the number of days we may need to use air conditioning if we have it. Next slide, please. That trend is not, first of all, not just a projection, and it's also not just in Kingston. This has been happening across Canada As we see in this slide, over the last 70 years, the average winter temperature has slowly been increasing. Next slide, please. So Kingston is aiming to build climate leadership with high performance new construction. So the rest of this presentation is aimed at explaining the community improvement plan in a little more detail. And basically it's aimed at stimulating construction of residential and commercial buildings that have highly efficient use of energy, water, and GHG emissions. It includes proposed financial incentives to help cover the increased cost of the building to these higher performance levels above and beyond the building code, which is the mandatory level in this province. So this program is voluntary. Next slide, please. So what is a Community Improvement Plan, or CIP? Well, the Planning Act in this province allows municipalities to use a CIP to address public need for brownfields rehabilitation, heritage restoration, or energy efficiency. So it allows benefits to go to private developers who satisfy the public interest need. For example, reducing impact on energy infrastructure or reducing emissions. So it is a tool for implementation for all municipalities. Next slide, please. The initial incentive that we're proposing is called a tax increment rebate grant program. I'm going to explain it and then give an example. This requires what's called an uplift in property taxes from the new development. So what that is an increase in property tax revenue from the before state, and the development raises the value of that overall property and building on it, providing that uplift in revenue. So up to 80% of that uplift can be rebated depending on that level of building performance. I'll get into that in a moment. Some properties are ineligible because they're tax exempt. They don't pay property taxes, so they can't be rebated on. This incentive requires achieving a green building certification, which I'll get into on the next slide. There will be additional types of incentives we'll be considering at a later time. Next slide, please. So there's a wide array of building performance ratings. A few of them are listed on the slide, such as EnerGuide and Lead Canada Rating and Passive House and Built Green. As we can see in that house-shaped graphic in the middle, the ground zero level is the Ontario Building Code, the mandatory level that developers have to build to. That is the law. The other examples above that, Energy Star, R2000, and Net Zero, are voluntary performance ratings that are, in this example, 20, 50, 80, or 100% above that building code. Next slide, please. So the CIP will incentivize things such as reducing air emissions, reducing, reusing, and recycling water, so that is used more efficiently. Same with energy efficiency and conservation, and energy generation on site, as well as storage and local distribution, and diverting waste from our landfills. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to explain how a CIP tax increment rebate grant works. Next point, please. So let's say a new net zero energy apartment building, it will create a $200,000 a year increase in municipal property taxes. Next point, please. The developer incurs $1 million of additional project costs to reach this level of net zero energy. Next slide, please. Upon project completion and payment of the first year's taxes, that developer can receive up to 80% of that new tax uplift back as a rebate. So that would be 80% of that $200,000 or $160,000 a year. Next point, please. This rebate will continue for up to 10 years or until the cost recovered. Next point, please. So in this particular fictitious example, that it would be about 6 years, 3 months for the rebate to fully pay for those additional project costs. Next slide, please. So the next steps for this proposed Green Standard CIP is that we'll present it to Council on December 15th of this year for their consideration for endorsement in principle. Staff will finalize the details of the Green Standard CIP early in 2021, such as making an amendment to the official plan so it can apply citywide. We'll then report back to Council the final program details later in the spring. That concludes the presentation. If we go to the next slide, I believe that should be at the question and answer session. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dave. I'm just going to mention, as we wait for some questions to come in, and a reminder to you that if you do have a question, that you would like to ask about any of the information that we just went over, there is the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So please type your question in there. A reminder, make it detailed so we can be providing you with the information that you're after, but also concise so I don't struggle through it. One thing that I want to mention is that there's quite a bit of information that we went through in that presentation, and this presentation will be posted to the Get Involved Kingston project page. If you did join us a little bit later in the session, I will just remind you that we do have a feedback opportunity on our Get Involved Kingston page presently open on this project. So if you do have some ideas or suggestions to provide, you can do so through our Get Involved page until 4 p.m. tomorrow. And please share it with your family and friends. Just a reminder, if you are joining us by phone this evening and you have a question, then please press *6 and that will trigger the raised hand function, at which point we will enable your audio. So I see we do have a question that has been posed, and it says, we are in the process of finishing building a passive house. Is there a possibility of applying for CIP costs retroactively? That's a great question. So we're going to be passing that one over to Dave.
Thank you. So the short answer is no. The program isn't been approved. It needs to have an enforcement date or an in-force date, if you will. So that would be at sometime later next year, and there would be an application process, so it can't be for retroactive costs, unfortunately.
Thank you, Yvonne, for that question. So if anyone else has any other questions, we are here to take them. Also in the room is Julie Salter-Keane, who is the manager of the Climate Leadership Division. She and Dave work very closely together on these projects. And as Dave mentioned, there is a report going to council on December 15th. And again, there is an opportunity to provide your feedback through our Get Involved Kingston project page. We talk about Get Involved Kingston a lot. If it's unfamiliar to you, it is our public engagement site, and we recently reached 10,000 subscribers. So that is excellent. We also went over a lot of information, and I'm actually going to just ask Dave a quick question because we saw a lot of data presented. Oh, actually, I'll save my question because we're going to prioritize the folks here joining us. So Christian says, so each project will have to be certified under a program such as LEED to get the CIP. So it's a two-part question. So that's the first one. The additional cost for LEED or other may be less optimal than the benefit achieved. Okay, so I'm just looking. So our project team is reading the question, and we're going to be throwing that one to Dave. He has his hand raised. Over to you, Dave.
So I understand the first one, don't entirely understand the second part, but I will still attempt to address it. So yes, each project would have to have a third-party certification under one of the green standards that we list within the CIP. So once council has approved it, the document will be made public, and you can see the specific levels of incentive for the specific green standards. So your example is the LEED. So the follow-up looks like it further elaborates. If we pay for the green standards, the CIP helps pay for that, but maybe not net positive. Correct. It may be net zero. So I'm not too sure the additional cost for LEED may others be less optimal than the benefit achieved. You don't have to achieve LEED. The LEED may have points for things that have nothing to do with energy, water, or waste. And you're right, it may not be as optimal as focusing on some other aspects, mechanical aspects or building envelope aspects. Perhaps you should use a different green standard that does show that optimal level. So as we roll this out next year, there will be training sessions and more detailed technical sessions with builders and developers so we can go over these specific technical aspects.
Perfect. Thank you, Dave. And Christian, please let us know if we answered that question for you. The next one we have is from Ken, and Ken asks, in the apartment example presented, please define, clarify. Okay, so Dave, that was something that you spoke to, so I'm hoping that you're able to address that for us.
Sure. So let's say there was a piece of land that the property taxes were $300,000 a year before the development. An apartment building complex gets built. It raises the value of that property. So now the property tax revenue is $500,000. The uplift is the difference, or $200,000. So it's the improvement to the property value from the development.
Great. Thank you for that question, Ken. And Dave, thank you for your response. Just a reminder that this presentation is going to be on our Get Involved Kingston project page. So all those charts and graphs that you saw, as well as some of those examples that Dave provided, you're going to be able to go back and review them. And also we do have our project leads listed there. So I know they have an open door policy. So if you have questions for them, then they will be happy to answer them, because I know sometimes in the moment we have to think about things a little bit before we can come back with a question, and that's okay. So just a reminder that if you are joining us this evening by phone and you have a question for the project team about the Green Standard Community Improvement Plan, please press *6 and that will trigger the raise hand function, and then we will enable your audio so that you can pose your question to the project team. Great. So not seeing any new questions coming in, I am going to ask a question of the project team just about the timeline. So Julie, I'm wondering if you would be able to provide some timelines for folks listening in. We've heard that the report's going to be going to council on December 15th, and we've kind of touched on next steps from there. But if you could just elaborate on that a little bit for us, I think it would be appreciated.
Thanks, Julie Lee. Yes, so we'll be taking a report to council on December 15th, asking for endorsement of the Green Standard CIP with a number of recommendations requesting that staff proceed with an amendment to the official plan to permit the Green Standard CIP within the entire municipality. The current community improvement policies permit CIPs within the urban boundary. We will proceed then, or staff in the planning will proceed with an official plan amendment in early 2021, and we will report back to council upon approval of that. And looking at the feedback that we received tonight as well through our Get Involved page, provide a recommended Green Standard CIP to council in early 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. And I'm not seeing, oh, Ken has a question. I was just going to say there was no additional questions. All right, thank you, Ken. So I'm just going to read it over and give the project team an opportunity to review it as well so we can give you a complete response. So can you ask, in an apartment redevelopment, the uplift may be small, but the efficiency can be significant. Is uplift the only number the rebate is based on? So for an answer to that question, I'm going to be turning it over to Dave.
So the short answer is yes. It is based on the increase to property tax revenues. I can say that the full CIP document will outline some other incentives that municipalities can legally utilize. So in this particular case, for that tax increment rebate grant, we are tied to that uplift in tax revenue. However, when we introduce new incentives, they will not be as closely tied to the property tax at all. So we expect over time that the incentives will increase. It's just due to COVID's impact on municipal budgets. We thought we would start with one initially and then sweeten the pot, as it were, over time. Julie Lee, I also have reread the question from Christian Peterson, and I think I understand his follow-up question. So this is the, if we pay for the green standards, the CIP helps for that, but may not be net positive. So is it okay if I...
Please do.
So give an example where, let's say we're using the EnerGuide energy rating for new homes. You may get down to 40 gigajoules per year, and that would qualify, for example, 40% tax rebate. So we recognize that some developments may not be able to reach that net positive level at this stage for a variety of reasons. So there's lower levels incentives to get there. So you could get to net zero ready. So making sure the equipment has all the structural pieces there, the infrastructure underground for the equipment to be added later. There's also a level for that. But you're right, not every building will be net zero, and net positive is above and beyond that isn't in our current green standard levels. Hopefully that answers that.
Thank you, Dave. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge everyone who has taken a piece of their Monday evening to join us to learn more about the Green Standard improvement plan. It is much appreciated by the project team. We're going to continue to take your questions and provide answers. I just want to ask that once we get through the question period, if you could hang on just a little bit longer, because there is going to be an assessment poll at the end, and that is going to help us through our process. So please just keep that in mind and do hang around even once all the questions have been answered, so you can tell us how we did and we can continue to get better. So we do have a question from Paul. And Paul, you ask, is this program being used in other municipalities? Okay, and for a response to that, I see Dave has turned on his video, so over to you, Dave.
Yes, there's some similar programs. Toronto would probably provide the best example. It's a green development standards. There's voluntary levels that include financial incentives. There are other green development standard programs that don't have incentives. They have tools to help developers get there. There's encouragement and supports, but they haven't instituted incentives. So we looked at the programs without incentives and the one with, and we recognize there is an increased capital cost to build to these higher levels. And given the, you only see a few of these buildings across Canada, the incentive should encourage developers to build more of them if the incentive is strong enough. So based on that research, we believe we've come to levels that are fair, and they do incent and provide financial encouragement for developers to build to these higher levels. So it is modeled on other communities.
And I would just like to add to that, Dave, and thank you, Paul, for that question. I believe the city's proposed Green Standard Community Improvement Plan is the only one in Ontario if as we proceed to council. Like Dave said, Toronto has a plan, but it's through their development charge rebates. So we would be one of the leading municipalities looking at a community improvement plan for our green standards.
Great. Thank you both. And Paul, thank you for that question. So if anyone else in attendance this evening has any questions for our project team about the Green Standard Improvement Plan, I do invite you to bring them forward. As I mentioned, we have some great expertise in the room this evening, so they're here to answer your questions. So please bring them forward. And again, all of these questions and responses will be in a reporting out document that will be posted on our Get Involved Kingston project page, as well as presented to Council. Okay, so I see we have another question that has come in from Yvonne. And you ask, our passive house will radically reduce the amount of energy we need for heating and cooling. We are planning to have solar panels in future to supply the energy we need getting to net zero, hopefully. If we wait for this program to go through, will we qualify for CIP support? And is it based on the uplift of the value of our house or how it is quantified? That's a good question. So for a response, I'm going to be turning it over to Dave.
So as the program has not been approved by council and is not in force yet, I can't give any concrete answer on this. But if you do achieve passive house certification by Passive House Canada, then yes, you would qualify for CIP support. And it is based on the uplift. In some green standards, it is based on quantification of energy levels consumed in the building or emissions emitted by the building. If I recall, passive house is largely about the building envelope, achieving certain levels of air exchange per hour and a certain levels of insulation. So there is quantification in order to get that passive house certification. We're letting the experts behind the green standards confirm that all the quantification of the building performance is legitimate. And then if you get that certification, that's what deems you qualify for the CIP support.
Great. Thank you for that question. And thank you for the answer, Dave. So we don't have any more questions in the queue, but I want to provide everyone in attendance with a couple of minutes to, if you do have a question. Oh, there we go, Paul. One thing I want to mention before we get to your question is that in part of the presentation, Dave went over City Council climate actions and the strategic plan and some of the projects that the team is working on. And one of them was to establish a charitable climate action fund for local projects. And I just want to give a quick plug because I think everyone on this call will be interested in that. And that is our Kingston Community Climate Action Fund. And it actually launches tomorrow on Giving Tuesday. So I just wanted to mention that because it was mentioned in the presentation and tomorrow is the kickoff. So I just thought this is a group that might want to know about that. So now, Paul, you asked, can you explain the types of green standards you are looking for? That's a great question, and I want to hear that answer too. And for a response, we're going to be turning it over to Dave.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So again, this is in draft form, but these are the green standards that we are currently looking at. So Built Green, the green seal that's administered by Built Green Canada for mid and high-rise residential buildings. The Energuide rating system administered by Natural Resources Canada. We're considering R2000 standard for new homes as well. LEED at the gold or platinum level. Living Building administered by the International Living Futures Institute. Net Zero Ready administered by the Canadian Home Builders Association, and Passive House administered by Passive Buildings Canada. I should mention that these green standards can change over time, independent or interdependent with the Ontario Building Code. And I believe by the end of 2021, the Ontario Building Code may also be amended. So we will be reviewing these and making adjustments to them as we need.
Perfect. Thank you for that question, Paul, and Dave, thank you for that response. We have a question from Nathan. And Nathan writes, this is a great program and certainly one that is not seen in many municipalities at this time. How much of an uplift would you see in a single family home? And is it based on MPAC assessment? If yes, are they basing it on comparables? Over to you, Dave.
Thanks for the kind words, Nathan. I don't know about an uplift on a single home. Typically, this would be for larger developments because of the larger property taxes and uplift. I'm not too sure if the business case would be there for a single individual home. If it was an entire subdivision of 100, 150 units, it could be for the developer to build all of them. So this is expected to be more appealing to developers and home builders. And yes, property taxes are based on impact assessments.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Nathan, let us know if that's addressed your question. And then we have a question here from Kelsey, and Kelsey asks, has there been consideration for providing incentives beyond costs recovered to make the construction costs of these green buildings less than those of traditional building for developers? So Dave is the man of the hour. Over to you, Dave.
So if I understand this question right, there's other costs that go into buildings. Some of the costs that may be more of administrative in nature, such as building permits. You heard Julie mention that there's development charges used in Toronto. There's other mechanisms that can help improve the business case. We will be reviewing those in the future. We are restricted to the financial mechanisms in the Planning Act around community improvement plans. So we can't necessarily affect the costs of materials or construction labor, the price of solar panels. But we have access to a few mechanisms at our fingertips within the community improvement program legislation.
Great. Thank you, Dave. And thank you, Kelsey, for that question. Next up, we have a question from Ken, and Ken says, can you walk through a subdivision example of 20 homes? Now, I'm not sure if Dave requires more information for that, or if, do you, Dave? Do you want a few more details, or are you good to answer that?
I'm not sure what the question is focusing on, technology or what the potential tax uplift is. I wouldn't know what the tax uplift would be, you know, on a 20 home development off the top of my head, because you can have the same size piece of land and it's got different property taxes depending on what's built on it. I understand condos, condominiums have higher tax uplift. So if Ken could provide additional information on the question, we could try to answer it.
Perfect. Okay. So I see, Ken, you have added, you mentioned not a single, but perhaps a subdivision of 150 homes. Okay. So I'm going to turn to Dave to see if that provides the additional information that he needs to provide you with the information that you're after. And it seems that it helps. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken. And I think this might actually address Keith's question about, you know, does this apply to a property that's being rezoned from single family to a multi-unit mid-rise? So the short answer is yes, and that would be an example of tax uplift. The multi-unit mid-rise building would have an aggregate higher property tax value than the single family homes. So there could be sufficient tax uplift. I don't know if 20 homes would be. It would really depend what the area is that the 20 homes are being put on. For example, a greenfield space would have much lower property value than if it is getting 20 homes put on it. However, if it is just tear down of 20 existing homes, putting up 20 new homes, that tax uplift would be much smaller. But in terms of rezoning to multi-residential, it could be higher and support the increment rebate.
I just want to add to that as well. With respect to the property. So it's not the uplift on the rezoning of the property, it would be the construction of the dwelling to a green standard that would be considered for the CIP. So it's not the process. I don't know if that's what you had meant by the rezoning of the property, but just wanted to clarify, it's not the CIP would not apply to a rezoning of a property, but once the construction of the building has taken place.
Great. Thank you both, Julie and Dave. And Ken, thank you for your questions. And Keith, we kind of doubled up there a little bit. So let us know if we've addressed your question as well. So we have a comment and a question that has come from Nathan. And Nathan says, thanks for the answer on the single family home. This did answer the question that I had. Great. Has there been any consultation with MPAC regarding foreseeable tax uplift predictions for apartment buildings that have implemented green standards as suggested in the CIP? And for an answer to that, we're going to go back to Dave.
Thanks, Nathan. No, there hasn't been that consultation. I'm not too sure those predictions could be made. I suppose there could be some averages, but there's such variations. I'm not too sure we could get impact to put predictions on paper. We can certainly talk more over the coming weeks as this program is refined. So happy to talk more offline, and then we can include any updates on the Get Involved page.
Great. Nathan, thank you for that question. And Dave, thank you for your response. As Dave mentioned, we are going to be posting this information to our Get Involved page. So aside from being able to go back and review this presentation, as well as the reporting out document that will be put together, you can also actually go back and rewatch this session. As I mentioned, it is being live streamed right now on YouTube, and it will be posted within 24 hours to the Get Involved Kingston page. Just a reminder that if you have not already submitted your feedback through our Get Involved Kingston page on the Green Standard Community Improvement Plan, please do so. Feedback closes tomorrow at 4 p.m. And if you've already submitted your feedback, you've done your homework, but you know individuals who maybe have not done so yet, please give them a little reminder. We are looking for fulsome community engagement, and we appreciate not only your attendance and participation this evening, but for helping spread the word about this project. So I am not seeing any new questions in the Q&A at this point in time. Just a reminder that if you are joining by phone and you would like to pose a question to the project team, then you would press *6. That would trigger the raise hand function, and at that point, we would enable your audio.
When we are waiting here to see if there's any more questions, I just wanted to take the time to thank everyone, as Julie Lee did already, for taking the time to join us this evening. Very much appreciated, and the feedback we receive will be very beneficial as we look to finalize the Green Standard CIP in early 2021. And thank you again.
Okay, thank you, Julie. And not seeing any new questions, I think we will at this point move on. I will just mention, aside from having the feedback tool on our project page, there is also a Q&A where you could submit your question that way. So as I mentioned, sometimes we have to think things over a little bit. So if a question does come to you, then please submit it through our Get Involved Kingston platform. And you will also see Dave and Julie's contact information there. Yes, of course. So we have a question that's come in from Yvonne, and she asked if we wanted to follow up with specific questions later, who should we call or email? So these two folks in the room here this evening are going to be your touch points, and their contact information is available on our Get Involved Kingston project page. So if you go to www.getinvolved.cityofkingston.ca, you will see both Julie and Dave's contact information listed there, and they will be your go-tos with any more specific questions that you might have. But as Julie and Dave noted, this is going to council on December 15th. So I guess it would be hard to give anything very definitive until then. But I will leave that to them, and I'll leave it to you to follow up with them directly. So thank you for asking that. Okay. So
Julie, I would just add to that. Julie Lee and I work together every week on these programs, so we're going to be discussing any additional feedback that comes in. Generally speaking, though, if it is a question of technical nature, I'm likely to answer it. If it is policy or process, Julie Lee is likely to answer it, but we're going to consult with each other regardless, so it doesn't really matter.
So I'm just going to jump in and clarify, because it's not a prerequisite to have the name Julie to work at the City of Kingston, but you have Julie Lee here this evening, myself, as well as Julie Salter-Keane. So any policy questions, do not direct to me. Please direct them to Julie Salter-Keane. Thank you, though, Dave. That was quite the vote of confidence, and I appreciate it. All right, so seeing no new questions, we are going to move on to our poll. And I'm just going to advance to the next slide. So as Julie mentioned, so much gratitude for everyone who took part of their Monday evening to spend with our project team to discuss the Green Standard Community Improvement Plan. Your input is very much appreciated. Okay, so as mentioned, we do have a poll that we are asking you to complete. I'm going to launch it right now. And if you could take the time, I know you've already given us some of your Monday evening, which we are grateful for, but if you can take the time to complete this public engagement session poll, it's going to help us improve our process. So please, if you can submit your feedback, it will be much appreciated. So just as, oh, 9 of 9 voted. Okay, just before I let you go, a reminder that the presentation will be posted to our Get Involved Kingston page by end of day tomorrow. So you'll be able to go back and to review this presentation again. Again, I want to thank everyone who took the time to engage with us this evening. And on behalf of the project team, we wish you a great week and take care.